3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Might be the only brown guy on earth named Joe Bob.
That is actually her name, Joe Bob.
Live and welcome into the Dingy Bunker. On today, it is Monday, January 22nd, the year of our Lord 2022. A lot of stuff happened over the weekend, got to catch you up on. Big news, DeSantis is out of the race. Who did he endorse? Well, it's a question among many, except for it wasn't a surprise to any. Also, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, was on Bill Maher's show over the weekend on Friday on HBO, which was really interesting because I was excited, then let down, then excited again, or at least aware of a new thing that I kind of was able to noodle through over the weekend. And lastly, an LPGA transgender golfer. Is that going to be a new thing that exists that we are all going to have to, quote unquote, tolerate and deal with? But yeah, let's get right to it. DeSantis, governor of Florida, out of the race officially. Now, this isn't necessarily news to anybody who's been watching this sort of thing. I feel like not really a surprise to anyone, but I do want to get to some statistics and some money spent, and maybe, I don't know about necessarily have a discussion about it, but just kind of make people aware of how the whole political thing works from a primary standpoint. So, again, the not necessarily new news is that DeSantis is out, but what's interesting is how much freaking money this guy spent in order to not do very well at all. This is, oh shoot, is this the Daily Mail? I forget where I get this specifically. Oh no, this is Business Insider, saying that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis spent nearly $1,500 per vote in campaign money in Iowa, only to see his dream. Okay, then they go to the editorializing. Only to see his dream of winning the Hawkeye state disintegrated with President Trump's blowout victory in the state's GOP caucuses on Monday. Now, this is where it gets so interesting in terms of the amount of money spent. Ron DeSantis, and I say all this really liking Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is the best governor in the country, I think, in terms of pushing forward conservative policies and ideas in his state. And whether or not you are a hardcore Donald Trump fan or a never Trumper or anywhere in between on the spectrum, we can probably all agree Ron DeSantis would have made a great president. And still may make a great president someday. Who knows? I wish we didn't spend our time in a circular firing squad knocking down anybody who doesn't disagree with 100% of what we think. But anyways, this is fascinating. According to the data from Ad Impact, DeSantis and his allied super PACs spent nearly $35 million in Iowa through January 15th and roughly received 23,000 votes during the caucuses, which results in DeSantis spending about $1,497 per vote in Iowa. This will officially be the most money spent in a presidential campaign, really in politics anywhere, for the least amount of return. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Just to give you the numbers in perspective, Trump and his allies, in terms of the campaign and also the PACs, which are independent expenditures, spent nearly $18.5 million on advertising through January 15th, by far the lowest of the three leading operations, DeSantis, Haley, and the Trump campaign. According to Ad Impact, the former president received 56,000 votes in the caucuses. Meanwhile, Trump spent roughly $328 per vote in the state, a much lesser figure, leaner figure than the DeSantis campaign. So Donald Trump and his allied PACs spent almost exactly half of the amount of money that Ron DeSantis spent in Iowa and beat him by more than double, which is, oh boy, that's interesting. So the campaign, Trump's campaign, interestingly enough, now, I don't know how much we need to break down how campaigns work versus PACs, but this is pretty interesting. The DeSantis campaign spent only $3 million, while the affiliated PAC spent $32 million in Iowa. Whereas the Trump campaign spent $7 million, where the allied PAC spent $11 million. So the PACs in Iowa, the independent expenditures not affiliated with the campaign, DeSantis' PACs spent 3 times as much money as Trump PACs, but the Trump campaign spent more than double the DeSantis campaigns. Now, where this gets a little bit nuancy and tricky to figure out is what the advantage of a campaign versus a PAC is. I would imagine that because Trump did a lot bigger events and bigger rallies as his campaign, which can't be PAC associated because they're dealing with the actual candidate themselves. If you don't know this, the PACs / the independent expenditures can't coordinate, legally speaking, with the actual campaigns, even though everybody does it and nobody ever gets in trouble for it. But because they can't coordinate with the PACs officially, all of the big campaign stops that Donald Trump did, including the massive rallies that he had in Iowa, would have to go on the tab of the actual campaign. And while DeSantis probably didn't have nearly the big dollar figures having to spend on events, because let's be honest, nobody came out to see Ron DeSantis, I would imagine that his campaign had to spend less while the PACs could spend substantially more. I'm hoping I'm not losing people in the numbers here, but I think this stuff is fascinating. Not the fact that DeSantis is out, everybody knew that was going to happen, but the amount of money that Republicans spent in total to fight Republicans, which is an interesting thing. Nikki Haley, in case you're curious about those numbers, spent even more, about $1,700 per vote, but again, DeSantis being kind of the focus as he is officially out of the race. Oh, and by the way, and I probably buried the lead here, but if you didn't already know, he came out with a rousing endorsement of Donald Trump against Nikki Haley. And also, when Nikki Haley gets out of the race, she will also endorse Donald Trump. That's just, that should be known and obvious to everybody. But the former UN ambassador spent $37 million through the same period and earned just 21,000 votes, coming in third place, having spent $1,700 per vote. So let's just put this in perspective. $37 million from Nikki Haley, $35 million from Ron DeSantis, and we're talking about one state. So that's $72 million, and then you add the additional $18 million in Iowa for Donald Trump. So $90 million, almost $100 million Republicans spent dueling it out with Republicans in a very red state. Now, I'm complaining about this knowing that I don't have a better solution for it. But what I think all of this should say, the money spent, the time and effort spent just to get through the primaries, should be of note, because the primaries and the system that we have is a good indicator as to why incumbents often win. Now, I think that's going to be different starting in 2020, going through 2020, whenever, that incumbents have a more difficult time as the country gets more polarized and more difficult to manage because the government is so expansive. But you see this pretty much all the time. Everybody, generally speaking, wins 2 terms. Jimmy Carter was a 1-term president, then Reagan won 2 terms, then there was George Bush, but he was, again, on the tail end of another Republican, so you have 12 years as a Republican president in office. Then you have Clinton, who's 2 terms, George Bush, who's 2 terms, Obama, who's 2 terms, and then Donald Trump, who, again, was a 1-term president, but, of course, you already know that. But what I'm getting at here is Republicans, as a unit, spent $90 million against themselves in Iowa. Meanwhile, in the last fundraising period, Joe Biden raised $117 million, I believe. I believe that is the correct number. Now, again, like I mentioned, I'm more complaining, not complaining, I don't even know. I just want to point it out because I think it's interesting that we do this, But at the same time, I don't necessarily know how better to do the whole primary / selecting a candidate from your party system that makes sense in a way that allows people to have their say. So all of that maybe is much ado about nothing. But it is fascinating the amount of money spent by the DeSantis campaign to get literally nowhere in terms of making waves and getting votes for the DeSantis presidential one. Let's see. I do want to move to this because I think this is interesting. And speaking of DeSantis, Gavin Newsom, I think I don't know. Anytime, at least me, and maybe I'm too close to this, but I'm curious if you guys also think this. But anytime Ron DeSantis is mentioned, Gavin Newsom is also mentioned. And Gavin Newsom, governor of California, if you didn't know, was on Bill Maher's show over the weekend. So on Friday, Bill Maher had Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, on his HBO show, Real Time, which I think is in its like 22nd season, which is crazy. But I thought this was really telling. And like I mentioned, seeing Gavin Newsom going on Bill Maher's show, I went from excited to watching it to disappointed to then having a better understanding of what was happening to more, I don't know, eyes wide open did. I don't know what the appropriate term for that would be. But I'm gonna play you a couple clips from Gavin Newsom on Bill Maher's show, Real Time. And here, okay, well let me take you through the emotional component really quick. I was like, now a lot of us probably don't like Bill Maher's standpoint on a lot of things, and that's fine. Bill Maher would be the first person to tell you that you don't have to agree with everybody on everything. That's an insane way to live your life. But Bill Maher, noted lefty leader in liberal circles for the last, 3 or 4 decades, has since, in more modern times, become a traditional Democrat or a traditional liberal as opposed to this crazy progressive woke wing of the Democratic Party. And so for that reason, we on this show and conservatives really everywhere have bolstered Bill Maher's presence on the scene because he's saying things that are true regardless of whether or not we agree with him wholeheartedly on a bunch of the different things that he says. So for that reason, I was excited to see Gavin Newsom go on because I thought Bill Maher was going to hit him hard on the questions that I think matter to people. And what you're going to see in this clip is Bill ask a question that would appear to come from a conservative viewpoint, and then Gavin give a BS answer, and then Bill Maher not follow up at all, which really disappointed me until I figured out what was going on. So watch this clip, and then we'll play another clip, and then we'll discuss what I think is actually happening, and maybe how conservatives might be able to learn from it. Watch this.
And he said, "Who do you want for running president?" I mentioned, I think you'd be good at the job. Not this year, we know. No, I know. But he said, I don't think he could win. I don't think he could win. He's too progressive. Coming from this state and what he's done in this state to win in any southern state, any red state. I disagreed, but no, this is a progressive African-American owned station, and I'm sure they like you, but he doesn't think you can win. What do you say to that if you could win look at the swing states, there's only 8 of them.
Right. Well, I mean, California is an interesting case study, isn't it? It's the size of 21 state populations combined.
Yeah.
2/3 of the state is very deeply red. We don't need to be lectured on rural politics or border issues. I mean, in so many ways, these are familiar issues, and the issues of the heartland of the United States are very much a part and parcel of the work we're doing in this state. But look, I understand this notion that you're from the coast, you don't understand those things. You can't talk the language. You're not able to communicate, and you're not able to actually encourage and find that common ground.
No, it's stuff like there's a new law in this. I think we have way too many regulations and laws, as we've talked about. And this one, I think, says if you're a department store with over 500 employees, You have to have a gender-neutral
the toys.
toy department.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I get it.
So do you think that's
No, but it's
silly?
interesting.
Do you think that's a silly thing that
What was interesting-
we too much government there?
Look, that's an interesting one because the department stores came to us supporting that, and they're the ones making a case for that. They were making a case. They're already moving in that direction.
Wanted you to make a law about them?
Well, but they supported the legislation. It wasn't legislation that was enacted, that was initiated from my office, but it was legislation that came up with interesting support from the industry itself. But I understand how that's exploited, and good people can disagree. But that's not something we woke up and said, this is a top priority for the state, when we know the top priorities are homelessness, housing, the issues of crime, quality of life, and issues related to regulation and taxes, which are all top of mind.
Okay, so now we don't need to get into the ridiculousness. First of all, that's not true. That's just flat out, blatantly not true. Target and Walmart and a bunch of your big retail stores weren't going to the governor's office saying, hey, you should really institute a law that separates non-gender specific toy aisles. And if there was any of that, which again, I don't think there was, if there was any of that, that is the epitome of crony capitalism, where the big retailers say, hey, let's design a ridiculous and stupid law to put any of the mom and pop stores out of business who don't want to comply with the ridiculous law that we passed. So maybe if there was any support, which again, I don't think there was, that's the only reason that you would find your big retail stores pushing for that sort of stuff. At the same time, Bill Maher at least asked the question, right? At least he's asking the question of, hey, why is this happening? Also, Gavin's saying, well, this was kind of the trajectory of what the stores were doing, so we had to put it. Why would you even? How is that how your brain works? How is that, well, this is the direction things are going, and rather than just let them naturally go there, if you believe that's happening, which I don't, but if you believe that's happening, you think this is the natural progression of things and how it's working, why do you need to put a law in place to force what's already, quote unquote, naturally happening in his mind? Anyways, what a ridiculous answer. But Bill Maher asks the question, and then after that, I cut it off because he didn't follow up on it at all. He didn't argue with the ridiculousness of what Gavin had just said. And so now, in this process of watching this, I'm getting frustrated. I'm taking you through my mental picture in real time, pun intended, of Bill Maher not pushing back. Here's Bill Maher again asking a question, which again is a legitimate concern, and not pushing back. Bill Maher's right to ask this question, and Gavin obviously waffles on it, and then I'll get to my big epiphany / realization. Check this out.
For a while, and we still don't have enough water in the Colorado River and all this stuff. Yeah. And then whenever I read, 80% of the water goes to agriculture. Almonds. Right. You know how much water it takes?
Many gallons.
1,900 gallons to grow a pound of almonds. Yeah. Come on, man. Take on big almonds.
Take on big almonds.
I mean, it's not like we don't have the water.
No. You're right about it. It's not that we don't have the water. That said, the last couple of years were tough. I mean, but it's also where the water's falling and we're not capturing it. And we're not capturing in those extreme years with these atmospheric rivers. Wets are getting a lot wetter, dry's drier, hot's getting a lot hotter. And so we've got to modernize our conveyance system. We've got to modernize our storage, not just above ground, but below ground. And so that's a big part of our focus and frame, including desalinization plants. We have 20 projects just on desal that we're working on today. So we put out a detailed water strategy that includes, by the way, getting that Delta conveyance project back up and operational, and includes the first above ground off stream storage facility in half a century in the state, which, by the way, is being aided by a regulatory package I pushed forward to reduce red tape in the state of California and address the permitting quagmires that you rightfully pointed out.
You're good at this.
Okay, so again, this is, and I'm working to a point here, which I do actually think is interesting, and possibly maybe more conservatives or righties can learn how to do this as well. I was furious about that. If you don't know this, and I don't want to get too into California politics. California has been suffering from a drought for a very long time. It did rain a ton last year. It's raining right now here in California. But also in California, when do you think the last time California built any significant water storage? Again, knowing that we're in a massive drought in this state, knowing that all water that falls from the sky needs to be captured and utilized to the best of its ability, when's the last time you think California built any sort of significant water structure? Why can't I think? Aqueduct. What? Storage. Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know why. When's the last time you think California built any significant water storage? Was it 5 years ago? Was it 10 years ago? Was it 20 years ago? No. What about 30 years ago? No, it's been over 30 years since California has built any significant water storage. But add another 20 years to that. California has not built significant water storage in over 50 years. Let me tell you that again. California, the state that complains so much about being in a drought, that pays an exorbitant amount of money to states like Colorado for water rights of the Colorado River or for various legislation that allows more water to flow to the state of California. California has been a drought for as long as I have been alive, that regulates how often you can water your lawn, has not built any substantial, significant water storage in 50 years. And Bill Maher knows that. Gavin knows that. But when Maher asks the question, hey, what the heck are we doing about the water? Gavin gives some floofy, not at all addressing the red tape that surrounds the water storage problem in California that is instituted by the government that he runs. He doesn't touch on it at all. And then Bill Maher says, wow, you're really good at this. Another big clip that got played on that show, and they won't play the whole thing because at that point we might as well just play the entire interview, and I don't want to do that. But another thing he was talking about, Bill Maher was talking about the red tape and regulation in housing. And Gavin Newsom gave, well, I'm fighting Huntington Beach, which again, if you know anything about that situation, Huntington Beach is pushing back on the state-mandated homeless city. Huntington Beach doesn't want to do that. It has nothing to do with building quote-unquote affordable houses. Huntington Beach doesn't want to have bums and junkies infiltrate their city by building a big hobo hotel. And so he gave that answer. So through this entire thing, I'm sitting here thinking, sweet. Bill Maher, who has, I don't even say come around to rationality, but who has remained rational, regardless of whether or not I agree with him on things, he's remained level-headed about things as his party has taken a severe left turn into insano land, didn't push back on any of this. And I was irritated about it. I was upset about the fact that I was so excited to see Gavin Newsom get grilled by one of his own, but it didn't happen. And then I asked myself why. And what I came up with, what I thought was really, really interesting. And maybe conservatives/Republicans can take a hint from it. And some of them already do it, and I don't want to diminish that fact. But maybe more as a whole, as I just complained for however long about the money spent in Iowa and the Republican conservative circular firing squad that exists in the primaries, maybe we can do it a little bit more. What Bill Maher was doing was not hitting a candidate that he really likes. Because regardless of whether or not he's level-headed, he still does like Gavin Newsom, and he still does want him to be the president of the United States or manage the state well, because even though Bill Maher has not gone the crazy progressive side of his party, he still does want liberal policies to be passed and have some regulation on those policies, as he's admitted himself. So while I was hoping that he was going to grill a governor from his own party in the state that he lives in, I think I understand why he didn't and figured out what he was doing. What he was doing is calling out the things that irritate him and are bad for his party, the Democratic Party, Bill Maher's party, And rather than grill him on the answers, what he was doing is letting Gavin know that we care about this sort of stuff. Not only the people that are on Twitter and loud about hyper-progressive, woke nonsense stuff are not the only people that you need to be catering to. What Bill Maher was saying is that there are still rational Democrats out there and moderate Republicans that you can appeal to if you handle this, 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 and this. And what I think he was doing was telegraphing those thoughts in the form of questions that are pointed and not really caring about the answer. Because at the end of the day, Bill knows, as I know too, that politicians are never going to give you a straight answer. So getting a straight answer of them maybe shouldn't be the goal or the objective. Maybe when you're interviewing politicians, having them come on your show and talk about what they want to talk about. If you're going to ask the hard questions, don't think that you can just sit there and grill them because they're going to figure out how to spin their way out of it. Maybe the goal is to let that politician or elected government official know this is what we care about. And if you look at it through that lens, I think Bill Maher did a great job. Even though I was super frustrated watching the thing, as I thought about it later, I had to keep in mind, well, he likes Gavin. He's not going to sit here and just grill him incessantly. He's going to ask him questions about, hey, what gives on this trans toy aisle? What are we doing? The water storage. What's going on? The California building red tape. What the hell? All of those things I also care about. But I think that Bill recognizes he knows he's not going to get a straight answer out of the governor, and he doesn't want to necessarily tank a guy who he thinks can do well on a national stage. So then I got to thinking, well, what if the conservative side of the aisle started doing that maybe just a little bit more? And I'm not saying let people slide with stuff. Still ask them the hard questions, but understand that politicians are going to do the politician stump speech on your show, and maybe rather than going back and forth on nuances, through the form of questions, tell them exactly what you see voters see as the problem. I don't know. I thought it was a fascinating, and if I lost you during that whole screed, sorry about that. I just look at this from if the ultimate goal is to win, it would appear that Bill Maher, for his side, did a good job at that objective. So that's that. I understand that was a long-winded kind of, I don't know, just an interesting... Marcel says Gavin Newsom has diarrhea of the mouth. True. You know, so do most politicians. But I thought that was fun. Anyways, let's get to this before we wrap things up here. I think this is so interesting. The LPGA could have its first trans golfer. Over the weekend or last week, I don't know. I don't really pay much attention to amateur women's golf. But recently, Haley Davidson, 30, a transgender golfer with dreams of making the LPGA, has won a women's tournament in Florida, which improved Davidson's chances of earning a spot on the in a qualifying tour. If Davidson were to be awarded 2 of the 10 exemptions of the Epson Tour, they could have the possibility of earning the approval from the LPGA while transitioning from male to female. Now, this is an interesting one because golf is an interesting sport. Caitlyn Jenner, famously, or maybe not famously, has been a hardcore, no, you can't let dudes play women's sports, but also has thrown in the caveat and the nuance of, well, it depends on the sport. And to an extent, I would agree with that. It depends on what you think of as a sport necessarily. But if you're looking at competition, I would say, let's look at chess. I don't care. I don't think there even is a men's division in chess or a women's division in chess. Maybe at the collegiate level, but at that point, yeah, why are we separating them at all? Unless we're going to go as far down the road of biology and anatomy to say that men are more capable in those types of competitions. But basically, to an extent, yeah, I probably agree. My line is probably pretty far. Like if it's like a Sudoku competition or chess or something that has zero physical activity, yeah, let the men and women compete against each other. I don't care. Why would I care? Jenner has a probably a more lefty line than I do, and says, well, golf is probably one of those examples where transitioners can compete against each other. I would say no, absolutely not. But just so you know that some people do have some gradations depending on the sport. So this is where this kind of gets interesting. Davidson allegedly has been talking to the tour since 2016, but wasn't deemed eligible to compete until 2021. When, at the time, Davidson had been on hormonal replacement therapy for 5 years and 8 months. Now we're getting into a big fallacy here of whether or not that actually does all of the things that they claim it does and has the effects that a bunch of the trans advocates say it does. I don't think it does, but we probably don't necessarily need to have that conversation, other than the reminder of the fact that if you go through puberty as a male, you still have the bone density, you still have the muscle mass, and none of those things can be taken away with any amount of quote-unquote hormone replacement therapy. Davidson also had the full gender reassignment surgery by that time, according to a post on social media dated October 2022. That's also an interesting component of this. If the line is, and this is where I don't think you necessarily need to, this line shouldn't exist, but if people are going to say, well, the line is, well, are they fully genderfied? Well, who's going to check that? Because this is the New York Post, and it says, according to a post on social media, is that the extent that the PGA Tour does it? And whereas you may think, no, they have to check. Do they, though? Do they really? Does anybody, one, want to check? And two, doesn't that violate some sort of HIPAA regulation? Like, I don't even know if you can, necessarily. So, are you taking the person's word for it that they had the full thing? And again, I don't even think that necessarily matters, because again, that doesn't take away the bone density and muscle mass and the quick twitch ligaments. It doesn't remove any of those things, so I don't think it actually matters. But if it did, how are you going to check that out? Which, okay, whose job do you think that is? Sir, ma'am, I need you to, you get the idea. I don't need to continue. But here's this. Davidson claims that he lost 15 miles of club head speed as a result of the transition. The average PGA Tour golf club speed is 114.2 miles per hour, where the average driver... Oh, club head speed. Is that different than... I wonder if there was a difference here. Sorry, I'm losing you in my thought. It says here in this article, the average PGA golf club head speed is 114.2 miles per hour, where the average driver's swing speed on the LPGA Tour is approximately 94 miles per hour, according to the analytics company Graph Golf. I wonder if that difference in verbiage of club head and driver's swing was intentional. Because I would imagine, obviously you can swing a driver. If you're not familiar with golf, you can swing a driver much faster, not much faster, but faster than you can swing, I don't know, let's say a 5-iron. So I wonder if that's a distinction there that matters. Anyways, about 20 miles an hour faster, but lost 15 on my club head speed after transition, according to this transgender Davidson. Now, really, the only reason of getting to this story is I wanted to read this quote from John Daly. If you don't know John Daly's act, he's hilarious. Really a sad story in golf when you consider all of the external factors that, didn't allow him to be as great as he probably could have been. But all of this is basically to get to John Daly's comments here. John Daly commented on the potential of a transgender playing in the LPGA Tour, saying, "I would have won 100 tournaments if I threw on a skirt and called myself a tranny." He goes on to say, "That dude is as feminine as a Ford F-150. Now, just for the record, I got this quote from, this sounds like something that John Daly would say, but I did get this quote from a satire PGA Tour account on Twitter that does have 1 million followers, but there was no indication that this was satire at all, and it seems like John Daly would have said that sort of thing. Now, whether or not he did, I'm pretty sure he did, because I did check a couple other places that did have this comment. But even if he did, this is a dude is as feminine as an F-150, which, depending on where you are in the country, is more feminine than, say, an F-350, which I've experienced a couple times driving around in my F-150. But I don't know, funny, interesting situations going on. But anyways, that'll probably do it for us today. Appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. If you haven't already, give me a follow on any of your social media platforms. Just type in JOBOB, be able to find me pretty much anywhere. But appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. We'll see you at the same time tomorrow, but I think we're recording stuff tomorrow. I'm going to be in, I have an insane day tomorrow. I think I leave my house at 4 a.m. and have things scheduled until like 7 p.m. So I'm planning on going to bed in 20 minutes. So not that any of you care about that, but all of that's to say is we won't be here in this studio, but I think we're recording a bunch of commentary / content today to have something going up at some point. So we will see you tomorrow in some way, shape, or form. God bless America. Thanks so much for tuning in. I didn't get this thing set up in time, so yeah, see you.